You can judge me. I get it. What I did, it wasn't pretty. It wasn't noble. And if I'm being honest, it wasn't planned either. But before you write me off as the villain in someone else's story, I need you to hear mine. Because people don't just wake up one day and decide to break their own lives. It happens slowly. Like a drip. A leak you ignore until the floor's rotted underneath you. Until you're standing there with your feet sinking into the mess, asking yourself, how the hell did I get here? That was me. I was broke. Not just money broke, soul broke. You ever felt that? Where you look around at your life and think, this can't be all there is? I was married, yes. To a man who slept beside me but hadn't really seen me in years. We weren't fighting. We weren't yelling. We were just quiet. Like roommates who forgot how to ask each other what we really wanted. Bills kept piling up. My job had cut my hours. The fridge was half empty and the light in the bathroom had been flickering for a week. And then one day, he knocked. Marcus. My landlord. Now listen, I know how that sounds. But hear me out. He wasn't what I expected. He wasn't pushy or cold or the type to threaten eviction just to feel powerful. He was solid. Big, tall, skin like polished mahogany, voice like Sunday jazz. The kind of presence that fills a room without saying a word. The first time he came by, it was to check a leak in the ceiling. But the second time, he looked at me. I mean, really looked. Like he saw through the makeup I didn't have the energy to put on. Through the forced smiles and half-hearted small talk. And in that moment, something inside me shifted. Not in a lustful way, not yet. It was something deeper. Like he saw a version of me I didn't even recognize anymore. A woman who still had fire in her. I wasn't looking for love. God, I wasn't even looking for attention. I just wanted to breathe. To feel human again. To feel wanted, even if just for a second. But the thing about storms, they don't always come from the sky. Sometimes, they start in your chest. A single spark that turns into a flicker. And then a blaze that burns everything you thought was safe. This isn't a fairy tale. This is what happened. And no, I'm not proud of it. But I'm not gonna lie about it either. Because the truth is, when you're desperate enough, emotionally, financially, spiritually, even the wrong offer can feel like salvation. And Marcus, he made me an offer I never saw coming. Let me tell you everything. So, my name's Jenna. I'm 36. Married, technically. No kids. Used to work at this little print shop downtown, but they let a bunch of us go after the merger. They said it wasn't personal. But it felt personal when I had to choose between paying the gas bill or buying groceries. I lived in a one-bedroom apartment in a building that always smelled like someone else's dinner and sometimes mildew, depending on the weather. Peeling paint on the windowsills. Drafty in the winter. The kind of place where the walls are thin enough to hear your neighbors fighting, but no one ever talks to each other in the hallway. My husband, Alan, he works in IT. Long hours. Always tired. We weren't fighting. Not really. But we weren't anything else either. I'd say good morning and he'd grunt. I'd ask how his day was and he'd just nod. He wasn't mean. He wasn't abusive. He just wasn't there. Not in the way that counts. I started skipping meals to make things stretch. Letting the dishes pile up. There were days I didn't even leave the apartment, didn't even shower. It felt like my life was slowly caving in around me, and I was just waiting for it to collapse. Then one afternoon, the knock came. 3 slow, deep thuds on the door. I opened it, and there he was. Marcus. My landlord. He was taller than I remembered. I'd seen him around the building once or twice before. Maybe early 40s, but he carried himself like a man who knew exactly who he was. Broad shoulders, deep brown skin, beard neatly trimmed. Eyes that didn't just look at you, they searched. He didn't smile. Not at first. He just stood there with his hands in the pockets of his black hoodie and said, "Hey, sorry to bother you. Just wanted to check in about rent." And God, I froze. because the check had bounced. I knew it. There was an eviction notice still sitting on the kitchen table behind me, unopened. I swallowed hard and gave him that tight, embarrassed smile, the one you practice when you don't want someone to see how close you are to falling apart. I'm working on it, I said. He tilted his head a little, studying me. Not judging. Just observing. And then, instead of pushing, he asked, "You okay?" That question hit harder than it should have. I wasn't okay. But when someone actually asks and means it, it's like the truth rushes to the surface, whether you want it to or not. I must have looked so pathetic, hair in a messy bun, old t-shirt, socks that didn't match. He glanced over my shoulder, and for a second, I thought he might step away and leave me to my shame. But then he said, "You look like you've had a week. Want a glass of water or something?" And, just like that, the script flipped. I nodded, stepped aside, and let him in. The place was a mess. I remember the shame burning up my chest as he walked through the doorway. The pile of laundry on the couch, the stack of unopened bills, the little crack in the ceiling above the kitchen sink where water had started to leak again. He didn't mention any of it. Didn't even glance at the chaos. He walked straight to the sink, turned the knob, and muttered, "You know this faucet's still dripping?" I blinked. "Yeah. I've been meaning to call it in." He waved a hand. "No need. I'll take care of it." He didn't ask. He just rolled up his sleeves, and I noticed how strong his forearms were, the veins in his hands as he tightened the pipe beneath the sink. There was something about the way he moved, like he'd done this 1,000 times, but never in a rush. He was present, focused, quiet, and I stood there, leaning against the counter, watching him. It hit me then. I couldn't remember the last time someone had done something for me without expecting anything in return. No transaction. No guilt. Just kindness. We didn't talk much. But when he finished, he turned the tap on, then off. No more drip. He washed his hands. Then he looked at me again, this time softer. "You need anything, Jenna, just say the word." And I swear I nearly cried right there. Not because of the faucet, but because I'd been invisible for so long and suddenly, someone saw me. I wasn't stupid. I knew the rules. He was my landlord. I was a married woman. But I also knew what loneliness felt like. And in that quiet kitchen, with the faint scent of lavender dish soap and something tender lingering in the air, it felt like a door had been cracked open. Not all the way, just enough for a breeze to sneak through. And that breeze? It carried the scent of danger, and something that felt almost like hope. I hadn't felt seen in so long, and suddenly, this man I barely knew made me feel like I mattered again. After that first visit, Marcus started showing up more. Not in a creepy way. Not in that landlord checking every light bulb kind of way. He'd knock, twice, always twice, and say, "Just checking in. Making sure everything's all right." At first, I told myself it was nothing. He was just being neighborly. Maybe he felt sorry for me. Maybe he was just trying to help. But there was something in the way he looked at me that said, he saw something more. Not just a tenant. Not just a woman down on her luck. He brought food once. Knocked on my door holding 2 white paper bags that smelled like sesame oil and garlic. Said he ordered too much takeout. "I can't finish all this by myself," he said, with that calm little smile. I knew he could have. But I let him in anyway. We sat on opposite ends of the couch, legs curled under us, the coffee table between us stacked with unopened mail and 2 steaming containers of lo mein. We started talking. Not about rent. Not about broken faucets. But about books. Turns out we both loved Baldwin. He told me he used to write poems in college, just to get girls to laugh. I told him I used to dream about writing for a magazine in New York, but life had other plans. He asked what kind of music I liked, and I told him about this one sad song that always made me cry. He didn't laugh. He nodded, real slow, like he got it. And when he laughed, God, when Marcus laughed, it wasn't loud. It was warm, thick like molasses. The kind of laugh that made you lean in, even if you didn't know why. His silences were even better. Not awkward, not heavy. Just safe. The kind of silence that lets you rest in it. I started to wait for his knock. I'd pretend I wasn't. But I'd clean the kitchen a little more, brush my hair, put on something other than Alan's old t-shirts. I told myself it was because I wanted to feel normal, presentable, alive. But the truth was, I liked how I felt when Marcus was around. It was in the micro moments, the little things. The way his eyes lingered just a second longer than they had to. The way he handed me a plate and our fingers brushed, just barely, but enough to send a charge up my arm. There was this one moment. I'd been washing dishes, and the sink splashed back at me. A drop of water landed right on my cheek. Before I could even react, Marcus reached out, wiped it away with the pad of his thumb. His skin against mine, warm, rough, gentle. And for a second, we just stood there, frozen. Then he stepped back, cleared his throat, said something about traffic, and left a minute later. And when the door shut behind him, I pressed my palm to my chest and realized my heart was pounding. He was just being kind, wasn't he? That's what I kept telling myself. He was kind, thoughtful, gentle. That didn't mean he wanted anything. That didn't mean I wanted anything. So why did I start fixing my lipstick at noon, just in case he stopped by at 5? Why did I start checking my reflection in the hallway mirror when I heard footsteps on the stairs? Why did I keep going back to that moment, that touch, like it meant something more? And worse, why did it feel like I was waking up from something? Like I'd been sleepwalking through my life. And now, with every visit, every glance, every shared silence, I was slowly, painfully, starting to feel awake again. I told myself not to read into it. That this man was just a kind soul crossing paths with mine during a low point. That what I felt was just gratitude, attention-starved confusion. But deep down, in that place you don't talk about, even to yourself, I already knew. I knew something was shifting. Something dangerous. Something I wouldn't be able to take back. It started on a night the whole world felt tilted. There was a storm rolling in. One of those thick, summer thunderstorms that makes the sky bruise purple before it splits open. I'd just finished lighting 2 candles on the kitchen counter when the power finally went out. The fridge hummed to a halt. The fan stopped spinning. And silence folded itself around the apartment, except for the patter of rain and the occasional crack of thunder that made the windows tremble. I was standing there, barefoot on the tile floor, thinking how pathetic it all felt. Me in the dark, candles flickering like I was in some tragic movie. No husband in sight. No money in the bank. Just me and the shadows. Then came the knock. 2 short taps. Always 2. I opened the door, and there he was. Marcus, standing in the hallway with a flashlight in one hand and a bottle of red wine in the other. "Generators still running in my unit," he said. "You don't have to sit in the dark if you don't want to." I hesitated. Told him I'd be fine. But he just tilted his head and added, softly, "Sometimes it's not about light, Jenna. It's about not being alone when the world goes dark." I followed him. His apartment was a mirror of mine, but it felt different. Warmer. Cleaner. A couple of books on the coffee table. A record player in the corner. A throw blanket folded neatly over the couch. He poured 2 glasses. Offered one to me without a word. We talked. At first, it was light, like we were pretending not to notice the tension humming between us. He asked about my writing again. I told him I hadn't picked up a pen in months. He said, "You still talk like a writer. Like your words come from a deeper place." That made me smile. It also made me look away, because no one had seen me like that in God, how long? The wine made the silence stretch longer between us. But it wasn't uncomfortable. It was thick. Heavy. Like the air before a kiss that hasn't happened yet. Then he said it. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just real. "You don't have to keep pretending you're okay, Jenna." And in that moment, I hated how much those words pierced right through me. Because I had been pretending. Every single day. Waking up beside a man who barely noticed me anymore. Smiling in the mirror like I wasn't breaking inside. Acting like one more overdue bill wouldn't unravel everything I had left. My throat tightened. I blinked fast, tried to sip my wine and pretend I wasn't falling apart. But the tears still came. Quiet ones. The kind you try to hide, like shame slipping down your cheek. Marcus didn't say anything at first. He just sat there, watching me like the storm outside didn't exist. And then, he moved closer. Not a lot. Just enough to close the space between us without touching me. I see you, he said. You deserve more than being invisible in your own home. Something inside me cracked. Not all the way, but enough. Enough to feel the shift. I didn't kiss him. He didn't kiss me. But the way his voice felt in my chest. The way the heat of his presence made my skin come alive. It felt like something had happened. Something we couldn't take back. I stood up suddenly. Mumbled something about needing to check on my apartment. He didn't stop me. Just watched me walk away, eyes steady, mouth quiet. I shut the door behind me and leaned my back against it, chest heaving like I'd run a marathon. And then I slid down to the floor, glass still in hand, and sat there in the candlelight, heart pounding like a warning bell. I didn't sleep that night. Not even for a second. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the thunder roll across the city. Every nerve in my body buzzing. Every inch of me replaying that moment, his words, his nearness, the way it felt to matter. It wasn't a kiss, but it was something. It was the beginning of a fire I couldn't put out. I didn't go to Marcus right away. Days passed. 3 of them. Long, aching, silent days. I kept telling myself that what happened during the storm, what almost happened, wasn't real. That it was the wine, the weather, my loneliness. That I could push it away like a bad dream and slip back into the skin of the woman I used to be. But something had already changed. I stopped eating, stopped sleeping. I'd find myself staring at my phone, wondering if he was thinking about me too. Wondering if he could still feel the heat of me in that tiny space between us. And the worst part? My husband didn't even notice. He was home, yes, physically. But every time he walked through that door, it was like he brought a wall with him. He kissed me like a routine. Talked to me like I was furniture. And the few times he asked if I was okay, he didn't really wait for the answer. So I stopped answering. Then, one night. I didn't plan it. Didn't dress up. Didn't tell myself a story about it being innocent. I just went. Marcus opened the door before I could think twice. He didn't ask why I was there. Didn't raise an eyebrow or make some clever comment. He just stepped aside and let me in. His apartment smelled like cedar and something warm. I walked in slowly, like every step was a line I couldn't uncross. And still, he said nothing. Until I turned to face him. Heart thudding so hard I thought it might shake the walls. And he lifted his hand. Gently. Touched my chin with 2 fingers. Tilted my face up until our eyes locked. I didn't speak. I couldn't. My throat was too tight, my skin too hot, my body too loud with need I hadn't let myself feel in years. He leaned in, but not fast. Like he was waiting for permission I didn't know how to give. And then, his lips touched mine. It wasn't fire, not at first. It was breath. Soft, careful, like he knew I was fragile and didn't want to break me too fast. My hands trembled against his chest. I felt the warmth of him through his shirt, solid, steady. And the way he held me, like I wasn't just something to be touched, but something to be kept. There were no words. Just sighs. The slide of skin on skin. The way his hands found the places I'd forgotten were part of me. And when it was over, when my body was draped over his, our breaths slowing in the quiet. He didn't say anything, neither did I. We just lay there. His heartbeat under my ear. My fingers tracing the lines on his chest like they were poetry. I wanted to stay. God, I wanted to stay in that stillness forever. Because for the first time in so long, I felt like me. Not someone's wife. Not a woman buried under bills and disappointment. Just Jenna. But I left. Sometime after midnight. Without a word. I slipped out of his bed, gathered my clothes like a thief in the dark, and walked the whole way back to my apartment barefoot. The air was cold. The floor felt like ice under my soles, and my heart was louder than ever. When I opened the door to my own home, everything looked the same. But it wasn't. He was asleep on the couch, my husband, TV remote still in his hand, a beer bottle half full on the table. I stared at him for a long time, and all I could think was, he had no idea who I was anymore. And maybe he didn't care to. I went to bed, curled up beneath the blanket, and stared at the ceiling like I had on that stormy night. But this time, it wasn't guilt that kept me awake. It was the memory of Marcus. His hands, his breath, the way he had looked at me like I mattered. It wasn't just the way he touched me. It was the way he listened. The way he saw me, without judgment, without obligation. With him, I felt alive. And I hated myself for it. I hated that I could feel so much with someone who wasn't mine. But even more than that, I hated how easy it was to forget that I belonged to someone else. Because the truth is, in that moment, lying on his chest, his hand resting gently on my back, it felt like home, and nothing that came after would ever be the same again. I told myself it would only happen once. Just once. Like it could be a secret I buried deep enough to forget. But secrets don't bury easy. Not the ones that change you. The morning after Marcus and I first crossed that line, I avoided my reflection. I couldn't look at my face, afraid of what I'd see there. A liar. A cheater. A woman unraveling with a smile on her lips and a storm in her chest. I tried to stay away. I didn't reply to his first text. Or the second. But the third? It just said, "Are you okay?" And that was all it took. Because the truth is, I wasn't. I wasn't okay. And part of me wanted someone to notice. We started meeting in secret. At first, just to talk. That's what I told myself anyway. Late afternoons, when my husband was still at work, I'd slip into Marcus's car, parked a block away. We'd drive to one of his empty units, quiet, echoing spaces that smelled like fresh paint and new beginnings. I'd sit on a countertop, legs swinging like a girl in trouble, and he'd just look at me. He never rushed. Never asked questions that scraped at my guilt. Sometimes, he'd bring lunch. Other times, we'd just sit in silence. The kind of silence that doesn't ask for anything, but somehow says everything. I started craving those silences. But the outside world? It started to tighten around me. My husband, he began to notice. Not the whole truth, but the cracks. He'd come home and squint at me like I was a puzzle with missing pieces. Asked if I was tired more than usual. If I was okay, I'd nod, force a smile, go through the motions. And still, he never touched me the way Marcus did. Never looked at me like I was anything more than his responsibility. Then the neighbor said something. Mrs. Alston. Retired. Nosy. Always watering her plants like they were surveillance equipment. She leaned over the balcony one morning and said, "That Marcus fella's been by your unit a lot lately. Everything all right, sweetheart?" Sweetheart. She called me that while planting suspicion like a seed. And it didn't stop there. One evening, I met an old friend for coffee. We hadn't seen each other in a while. She looked at me hard, too hard. Then smirked and said, "Girl, your landlord's fine. You sure you're not tempted?" I laughed it off. Or tried to. But my stomach twisted, and my hands trembled so hard I nearly dropped my cup. Tempted? I was so far past tempted. I was drowning in it. Marcus wanted more. He started saying things that scared me. "You don't have to live like this, Jenna," he'd whisper, brushing a strand of hair behind my ear. "You're not happy. You're surviving. But with me, you'd live." I'd pull away. Every time, a little slower than the last. "You don't know what you're asking," I told him once. He just looked at me. That quiet, steady gaze that saw through all my pretending. "I know exactly what I'm asking," he said. "I'm asking you to stop pretending with a man who doesn't even see you." "I see you. You feel that." He reached for my hand. Held it tight. "I can take care of you. All of you. If you let me. And God help me." Part of me wanted to believe him. But another part, the part still tangled in guilt and wedding rings and years of routine, that part screamed, "What am I doing?" I thought, what if I destroy everything? I wasn't just risking a marriage. I was risking the version of myself I had spent years building. The good wife. The loyal woman. The one who stayed, even when it hurt. And yet, every time I kissed Marcus, that woman faded further into the background. I'd lie awake at night beside a man who didn't reach for me anymore, whose love had turned into habit, who didn't know that my heart was slipping out of our home and into someone else's hands. I was torn in two. One half of me wanted safety, the life I knew, the lie that looked like stability. The other half? It wanted fire, truth, touch, to be seen, fully, dangerously, completely. And I didn't know how long I could keep pretending I could have both. Because love, even the wrong kind, it doesn't knock politely. It kicks the damn door down. And suddenly, you're standing in the wreckage of a life that once made sense. Realizing, you lit the match yourself. I didn't even hear him come in. It was late, later than usual. And I was sitting at the table, staring at nothing, wearing guilt like a second skin. The air shifted when he walked in. He didn't speak at first. Just dropped something on the table in front of me. A receipt. I stared at it for a long moment before my eyes focused. Hotel name. A date. My name. Marcus's card. The world went silent, like the space between a lightning strike and the thunder. Then his voice. Not loud, not cruel, just sharp, tired. Like a man finally saying something he'd been holding in for too long. "You think I don't know?" He laughed, bitter and hollow. "You think I haven't felt you slipping away from me?" I opened my mouth. To lie, to explain, to apologize, to beg, but nothing came out. He shook his head, eyes burning but dry. All this time I thought it was me, thought I wasn't doing enough, working too much, being too distracted. But no. He picked up the receipt again, held it between two fingers like it was evidence in a murder trial. "You were just gone." And I was too damn blind to see it. I stood, reached for him. Reflex. But he pulled back like my touch burned him. His voice cracked. "Was it just sex, Jenna? Or was it more?" I didn't answer, because the truth was written all over my face. It was more. And that's when I saw it. The look on his face, that mix of betrayal and disbelief, and something deeper. Like the man who had always known me suddenly didn't recognize me anymore. And in that moment, I knew I had broken something I could never fix. Not just the trust, not the vows, but something deeper. The us we had tried so hard to preserve, even when it had already started to rot. He didn't yell, didn't throw anything. He just grabbed his keys and left. No door slam. No last word. Just gone. And me? I collapsed. Right there on the cold kitchen floor. My knees hit the tile so hard I didn't feel it. Didn't care. I just crumbled. Curled into myself, arms wrapped tight, as if holding my body together could somehow hold my soul from falling apart. The phone rang. Marcus. I stared at the screen, heart pounding. Watched it flash again and again. But I couldn't answer. Not now. Not after what I'd just done. Because this wasn't a fantasy anymore. This wasn't stolen kisses or late-night whispers or secret hotel rooms. This was real. This was a man with tears in his eyes and a shattered look on his face, walking out of our home. Because of me. And no matter how many times Marcus called, No matter how many times I stared at that phone, wishing the guilt would go away. It didn't, because love and pain can live in the same heart. And I was drowning in both. I moved out 3 weeks after he left. The apartment was too full of ghosts, of late-night whispers, of silence heavy as grief, of a life that had cracked down the center and spilled out everything I thought I understood. It wasn't a big move. Just a one-bedroom rental with peeling paint and a view of the alley. But it was mine, and for the first time in years. I didn't have to explain myself to anyone. Not to a husband who no longer saw me. Not to a lover I had no right to keep. Just me, and the echo of choices I could never undo. I cut Marcus off completely. Not out of anger. Not even regret. But because I knew if I kept even a thread between us, I'd never untangle myself from what we had. He texted once. Just one word, "You okay?" I didn't respond. Because I wasn't. Not yet. And I didn't want to be that woman, the one who reached for comfort in the same arms that broke her. So I started therapy. Twice a week, I sat across from a stranger who didn't know my past, didn't flinch at my tears, didn't try to fix me. She just listened. And in those still, painful sessions, I finally started to hear myself. I wrote again. Not to tell the world my story, not yet. But to remember what my voice even sounded like. I wrote about loneliness. About shame. About desire that turns into ruin, and love that turns into a mirror. I wrote about how sometimes being invisible is safer than being seen. Until one day, someone sees you and you realize you've forgotten who you are. And slowly, word by word, session by session, I remembered. There were nights I missed Marcus. Not just the way he touched me or looked at me, but the way he listened. The way his presence filled a room like a quiet answer to a question I didn't know I'd been asking. But missing someone isn't the same as needing them. And loving someone doesn't always mean they're meant to stay. I didn't just lose Marcus. I lost the part of me that believed I had no worth unless someone else saw it. That part had to die. That wounded, desperate, aching version of me. The one who equated attention with value. The one who thought survival meant self-sacrifice. She had to go. So I could begin. I still carry the weight of what I did. I still flinch when I hear his name. Still wonder what would have happened if I'd just spoken sooner. Asked for more. Demanded better. But I also know this. Pain is a teacher. And some of us don't learn until we've bled. And I was finally starting to heal. It was almost exactly a year later when I saw him again. Not by chance, but somewhere I often went when I needed to breathe, to remember who I was without the noise. The little bookstore cafe around the corner from my new apartment. The smell of coffee and old paper curling in the air. The kind of place that feels like a warm blanket on a cold day. I was there, sitting by the window with my notebook open, scribbling thoughts that still felt raw but alive. And then I saw him. Marcus. Older. Sure, maybe a little more worn around the edges. But still the same quiet strength that had first drawn me in. Our eyes met across the room. No surprise. No shock. Just a deep, knowing pause. Like two people who had been through a storm. And were finally safe enough to just look at each other again. He smiled, just a small, almost shy curve of his lips. I nodded. Not with guilt. Not with regret. But with something heavier. Peace. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. Because some things you say with words and others you say with silence. With a look. With the way your eyes soften when they find the person who once held your heart so fiercely. And then I stood up. Turned away. Walked out the door and back into the world that was mine again. Some stories don't end with a kiss. Some don't end with fireworks or shouting or even closure. Some stories end with a quiet understanding. And a promise to never forget. Have you ever loved someone you weren't supposed to? Not because they were perfect or because it made sense. But because in that moment, they made you feel seen? Whole, even if just for a breath. Would you risk everything, your home, your family, your own peace, for a single moment like that? That fleeting taste of connection when the world around you feels cold and empty? I've been there. And I know it's not about right or wrong. It's about what loneliness does to the heart when no one else is watching. What it pushes us to reach for in the dark. So, tell me, what would you have done? Have you ever stood at the edge of a choice that could break or save you? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Because here we don't judge. We listen. We understand. And if you want to hear more stories that go where others won't, stories raw and real, full of heart and messy truths, subscribe to Cheating Confession Diary. Let's face these shadows together.